Hey everyone, welcome to the Troy Christian High School Chapel Podcast. At the end of this episode, please take a moment to subscribe to our Chapel YouTube channel and follow our Chapel Instagram account. Those two places will be the easiest way to check out what's coming up, as well as find some bonus content from our speakers and worship team. Most importantly, I hope the following message challenges and encourages you to grow in your relationship with God as you learn to love God and love others better. Enjoy. All right, welcome back to the podcast. We've been off for a couple weeks because of just the holiday season, little Christmas break. But we are back. Royce back in the house. How you doing?
I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm doing well. It's 2021, and it's still 2020 vibes.
Yeah,
right.
The real 2021 is still on its way.
Yeah. We're still waiting on it. It's just a little late, but we're still hopeful things will start to turn the corner, and we're looking forward to that. But we're back. We just had our first chapel of the semester of the year of 2021, and we started a new series called Intentional Community, which is actually the first half of a bigger series on just being intentional in life, and you kicked us off, so much appreciated. If you haven't caught that yet, seen that yet, really encourage you guys to take a listen or take a watch on YouTube and check out that message, because it really, especially I think as we start a new year, those are always great times to just take a pause and evaluate. What am I doing in life? How are things going? And your message on just intentionality in living, and particularly intentionality in community, is just a great start, I think, for all of us, just to start a new year. So there we are. But today I want to kind of talk about. I had the opportunity to kind of just lead some reflection time for our community here, and on what are some steps that we can take to be intentional in community. And I thought you'd just be a good chance for you and I to kind of talk about what do those things look like for us. So the three things that we kind of threw out were just having intentional reflection in our life on really just intentional reflection, period. I think that is like one of the most important disciplines to have in your life, that you have times where you stop and you pause and you just give consideration to how things are going and what's going on in your life, and just kind of reflect on that. Intentional scheduling, being that how are you actually implementing those practices of community in your life. There's a difference in being intentional. There's like this idea of like, I have the intention to do something. In other words, like I hope to do something. Or there's the intention of like, I'm intentionally, by discipline or decision, actually taking steps to do something. And that is the process ultimately of scheduling or setting goals and actually taking steps towards it. So intentional reflection, intentional scheduling, and then finally intentional conversation, where you, when you are with people, when you are in community, that you're taking advantage of talking about more than just the shows you watch, or the surface level conversations. You just take a step a little deeper each time and get to know the people behind, or who the person is behind some of those surface conversations. So I wanted to kind of hear from you a little bit. Is reflection a part of your life? And what does, when you think about your community, the people you're in, I think especially even right now, what are the things that come to mind for you? What are the things that you reflect on in terms of the intentionality that you have in the community that's in your life right now?
Well, I'll kind of start just by focusing on the intentional reflection piece in general,
just as a whole, right?
And then bringing that into community.
Yeah, I like that.
God is most of the time invisible and silent, and it can be really easy to just go through the motions and it seem like God's not saying anything, God's not doing anything, God's not up to anything. However, I think we as Christians, we believe that God is a God who kind of guides us. He's a God who directs us. He's a God who has a plan for our lives, and he is a God who is kind of at work, both in our growth and then also just our life path and our life direction, and the decisions we make could potentially be in line with his will. And because of like God's silent, invisible nature, I think the key to gaining an awareness of what God's up to in your life is having intentional time of reflection. And so one question I just like to pause and ask myself, like, plug this question into, devotional time. It's just like, what has God been teaching me lately? And that question kind of spurs me to think, okay, there are probably things that I've not been noticing because, just the way that God seems to operate is so almost smooth and natural in our lives. Like, you can either see, like, let's say you're considering like an opportunity and you feel like, oh, maybe this is an opportunity I should take. And then all of a sudden that opportunity, like that door is closed and it's no longer there for you. Yeah. You can either, without reflection, that just looks like, oh, well, a missed opportunity, sure, just kind of random, no like bigger purpose or plan to it. But when you like start asking yourself, okay, what is God up to in my life? And then you think, oh yeah, that that opportunity closed. Maybe God closed that door for me so that I wouldn't go down that path. And that's just like kind of one example of how I think intentional reflection, just taking a little bit of time and asking yourself, okay, what's God been up to? What's he doing? It creates like a narrative for what's going on in your life. And you start to see God's role in it a little more clearly.
Yeah. Yeah. When I think about that idea of just like leaning into God's voice, I think about the story of Moses going on to the mountain and waiting to hear to hear from God, to see God. And when he comes out, there's this, or sorry, it's not Moses, it's Elijah. When he comes out, there's this, there's a great wind, there's an earthquake, there's a fire, there's all these like, these massive things going on. And after each one, it's like God was not in that. And then there was this gentle breeze. And it was this quiet stillness where God's voice showed up for Elijah, right? That God showed up for Elijah. And that's, I think we want those. We want those, like, God, just be clear, be outright, like blow something up so that I know that it's you. And God's just like, I don't have to work that way. And I think what part of that is when God is in an earthquake, when God is in the fire, there's a degree of separation between us and God with that, right? Like where God becomes a sideshow, or God becomes this thing that like is still separate from us. But when he is in the gentle breeze, there's an intimacy there. There's a relationship there. What God is asking of us is to be still and be present with him. And that's when we get not just to hear from God, but we get to grow in relationship with God, which is why I think that reflection time is necessary for us. Because when you think about like the gentle breeze, how often does the breeze happen that we just are not aware of it?
Yeah, that makes me think of just how in a lot of movies, there'll be characters who will be like, God, I need a sign,
Right.
And they just want like this big kind of lightning bolt moment, this big dramatic thing. How many times do those characters say, God, give me a sign? And then they go and have reflective prayer for, 20 minutes a morning, you know what I mean? It's not, and I think the motivation behind that is exactly what you said. It's if God just hit us over the head with his activity, then there's no opportunity to cultivate relationship and intimacy with him, which is ultimately what he wants anyway.
That's right.
It's not about, I've noticed just God's revealed himself to be humble.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of times God is active in our lives and he never gets credit for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think he's totally content with not getting credit
Yeah.
for his activity in our lives. But what he does see as lacking is I wish they would just slow down and discern my role in this so that I could know that I'm the one providing for them. I'm the one guiding them. I'm the one leading them. I'm the one teaching them and growing them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so key to that. So how does reflection then, because you really just pointed out how reflection draws us into being able to actually see God at work and see God moving, and actually that ultimately draws us into a relationship with God. How does reflection help with community for you?
I think for me, it has been reflecting with community. So it'll be bringing, I think there needs to be time for reflection in privacy, and then there is time for reflection in community. One of my favorite small groups I've ever been a part of, every time we met, we asked each other the question, what is God teaching you, or what is God doing in your life? And what was cool about that was it was our personal reflection that got the conversation started. Here's what I've been seeing God do in my life. Here's what's going on. And then here's the role I think God's playing in that. And when you start to have a community of people who you have that conversation with, what they do is they are able to see your blind spots. They are able to see what God's doing in them, and maybe that connects to something God's doing in you, or maybe you see this one dynamic of the situation, and they're saying, well, actually, I think I see this going on in your life too, and I think God's up to something in that. And so whenever you reflect just by yourself, it's a good thing, but it will never reach its full potential unless you reflect in community with people who both know you and know God, because they can offer insights and perspectives that you just simply won't have on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. I think there's oftentimes that we're in community with people, but it's not intentional. And for me, those moments of intentionality, of just saying, okay, like who is my community? What's that looking like? Where's the health and unhealth in my community? Gives me enough perspective to say, what changes can I make? It's kind of like, for me, those moments of reflection have been kind of like what the Enneagram's done for me personally, where it's been like, okay, this is kind of who you are. These are some patterns that you have in your life. This is what it looks like when you're healthy. This is what it looks like when you're unhealthy. And then as a result of that, it's not like that's just who you are. It's like, okay, well, what steps can I make to become healthy? That's kind of how I approach reflection when I think about community is, okay, where's the health in my community? Where's the unhealth in my community? And then what can I do to bring about health in some of those areas? And so sometimes it's been just evaluating, like, man, in my community, I know like there are probably like seasons of life where certain parts of my community, I will have noticed that, man, we're just complaining a lot. You know what I mean? I'm like, man, that's like really unhealthy to dominate our conversation. What can I do to bring about some health in that area? So I might be more purposeful with trying to like flip that conversation, or flip what's like what we talk about by inserting, like when I hear the complaining, I might like insert like the silver lining side of it. That's kind of the way my personality kind of works. But those are the kinds of things that I'm trying to evaluate in my community, just to know, because we are shaped so much by the people that we do life with and that we spend time with, and oftentimes we're just unaware of it unless we stop and actually kind of work through. So I love that, like that. I think a lot of times we think of reflection as a very personal solo act, and that happens more powerfully maybe when you do that in community. And I also think it is necessary for you to evaluate the health of the communities that you find yourself in, because that's impacting your own personal health. Something that hit me too, I think even just kind of while we were talking about this, is like, how do you define who your community is?
Yeah, I think for me, as I was like listening to you just now, I was starting to think, are people thinking of their community as like the hundreds of people in their network, or are they thinking of their community as their, closest 3 to 10 friends? And when I talk about like, sitting down with people and talking about what's God teaching you, I'm imagining more of like those smaller groups of like, I've been a part of groups where it's about 5 or 6 of us who maybe come up with a schedule and say, hey, for the next, few months, we're going to meet at, Stoker on Wednesday morning before work and just catch up and be intentional with that conversation. And so I think there's like a ripple effect, and that how we experience change in our larger community comes from how intentional we are in our smaller groups of community.
Oh yeah.
And so like, let's say you're thinking of how do I, like, let's say, you mentioned that complaining example, and let's say your community is, all of like Troy Christian schools, how do you bring about like some sort of growth or change in that? I think, our instinct is to, well, let's get on stage and just talk about it and address it like corporately.
Yeah.
But I think what would be more like effective is if, there's a group of us who see that, and we have our small groups of 5 to 10 people that we're a little closer with and share with it there. And then they bring it to their, 5 or 10 people that they're also in community with, and having more of that kind of a ripple effect approach, because real transformation most often takes place where there's a higher degree of closeness and relationship and intimacy.
Yeah.
And dealing, like, I think that's part of why, like I think there's a lot of popularity with like being a part of a big church, but I grew up going to like a mega church with thousands of people, but the times I grew the most were when I almost had like a church within the church, where I had my 5 to 10 or however many people I was like actually close to, actually talking to, because I could go, when you're in a bigger community, you can go months or even years at a time without having a conversation with your pastor, who's supposed to be your spiritual leader.
Absolutely.
And like that there's good that can still come out of, that relationship of just hearing someone's teaching, but more the change that I think in the growth that we're all kind of longing for and pursuing, we need real kind of intentional relationships in our lives, that we can talk to, and we can have someone listen to us in a conversation setting and not just a sermon setting. To initiate more of that growth.
Yeah, absolutely. There's and you mentioned this, there has to be a step of intentional scheduling to make that happen. There has to be a level of okay, we're going to meet together, and this is when we're going to get together, and some people that works really well, doing like the calendar schedule kind of thing, and some people that like is difficult for, that's like the part of like just maintaining their schedule can be it's a discipline that needs to be developed for people, and that's where I think the idea of of whether it's a schedule or whether it's just setting goals in your life to be intentional, those to move something from that idea of intention just being something I hope to do to being a discipline that I am exercising comes from when I say, okay, this is when I'm going to do that. This is when I'm going to ask the question. This is when I'm going to get together with these people. And setting a very, like, you bring it down from this like kind of ambiguous idea to like it's got some handles, it's got some walls that kind of show you what the exact next step is to make. And so I know you'd mentioned that you guys said, okay, for the next couple months we're meeting here at this time, and I think that level of intentionality in community is what is going to actually create the space for growth for you, because consistency is the key to that, right? Like, and the proof is all around you when you think of, I think especially in this past year that we've experienced, I think a lot of people have been separated from certain community that they used to spend a lot of time with, and there's also certain community that maybe they have grown closer to, but there's been an intentionality, whether they knew it or not, to do that. I know for me personally, it's been interesting. My family all lives around here, and we would occasionally get together, but it wasn't, I mean, a lot of them work here, so like I would see them, but it was very more like work. There wasn't the intentionality necessarily there. But over this past year, we just started texting each other with just a text group, and that alone has, I think we have grown together as a family significantly because we started being intentional about communicating together, even when we couldn't be physically together. But it took that, like, okay, somebody created a text group, and we then just started responding and replying back and forth together, and there was a level of intentionality that didn't require a calendar, but there was a clear step on how we were going to make that happen.
Yeah, I think oftentimes we have a reservation to be the one who initiates intention in our relationships, because there's kind of this misconception that, in order like to run a small group or to be intentional with this, I need to be like kind of like the mini pastor of the group, or I need to be the spiritual leader of the group, and I need to be kind of have like something. I think a lot of times people assume that like every small group is like a Bible study where you have to like, pick a book and understand it and learn a bunch from it. And those are good things that exist, but what we're more talking about is just being intentional with connecting, being intentional about reflecting with one another. And it doesn't take a lot of spiritual leadership and pressure that comes with that to just be to start a text group, or to say, hey, let's meet here every Wednesday before work, or and to just ask someone, hey, what's God teaching you? You don't have to have all the answers figured out to be able to do something like that. One thing that as I've been kind of following up with students after the chapel message is there's, I've commonly heard a lot of people say, it would be, my friends and I, we typically like just to get together and have fun. Like, it seems kind of awkward or weird for us to get together and then just talk about our faith the whole time. And kind of my response to that hesitation has been, I'm not asking you to make all your conversations serious conversations.
Right.
I'm not asking you to make every time you hang out just like you're opening up about your faith every time. All I'm asking or challenging us to do is to add an intentional element to our already existing community.
Yep, that's right.
Add an intentional element to your already existing friend groups. How can, especially, for people who are experiencing community, I'm doing life with this person and that person fairly regularly. What if just one of those times a week you asked a serious question?
Yeah.
That's all That's all
it
really is.
That's all it is. That's right. Just bringing one element of intentionality to what you're doing, and then let it go where it's going to go. Absolutely. Those are so helpful. I think next time, let's jump on here and let's just talk about the questions that we need to ask in community. What are some of those? What is a question that we can bring to our community that is an element of intentionality? And so next time, let's talk about that a little bit. I think there's a lot here that I think is just helpful for us to kind of get us started in this year of jumping into community and being intentional with it. So tune in next time. We've got chapel coming up this next week with Maya Dilbone, one of our seniors, and we're excited about that, continuing the Intentional Community series. Thanks for joining us, and we will catch you next time.